As we discussed in the previous episode, the Warren Report indicates that Marguerite and Lee Harvey Oswald left New York to return to New Orleans in January of 1954. This timeline conflicts with Beauregard Junior High School report card that are a part of the Warren Report volumes, which states that Oswald attended 89 days of school at Beauregard Junior High in the fall of 1953. But we shall set that point aside for the time being. Regardless of what happened in the fall of 1953, we are certain that Lee Oswald was attending Beauregard Junior High during the spring semester of 1954, for the second half of his 8th grade year. When Marguerite and Lee arrived in New Orleans in January, they stayed for 2 weeks at 809 French Street, where Marguerite's sister Lillian Muret lived. Marguerite and Lee then moved into 1454 St. Mary's, which was an apartment building owned by Marguerite's friend of 20 years, Myrtle Evans. The Oswalds lived at this apartment from mid-January 1954 until November of 1954, when they then moved next door to 1452 St. Mary's for a cheaper rent rate. Lee Oswald was enrolled in classes at Beauregard Junior High shortly after he returned to New Orleans. Myra DeRouse was a gym teacher and was Oswald's homeroom teacher for the spring semester of 8th grade in 1954. This is Miss DeRouse speaking about her interactions with Oswald.
I held my roll call either in the cafeteria or on the stage in the basement. Sometime after Christmas, I got a new student. It turned out that his name was Lee Harvey Oswald. I never called him Lee Harvey Oswald because he asked me not to call him Lee. And I asked him what he'd like called, and he said Harvey. So I've known him as Harvey Oswald.
DeRouse got to know Oswald from being his homeroom teacher. She also remembers seeing him in the mornings before school, waiting on the front steps for the doors to the school to be unlocked. She said the only person she ever saw Oswald hang out with was Ed Vogels, who DeRouse often saw them riding bikes after school. DeRouse specifically remembered an incident regarding an upright piano that fell on Oswald.
On one occasion, when we were practicing basketball in the schoolyard, Ed Vogel runs out the yard and says, Mr. Roos, come inside quick, come inside quick. So Dorothy Duvick, the other PE teacher, and I went in the basement, and there on the floor was Harvey with an upright piano that had fallen. And he was about his legs, from about the waist down, was under the piano.
DeRouse and the other teacher helped Ed Vogel lift this piano off of Lee Harvey Oswald. She then asked Oswald if he was okay, but DeRouse wanted to call his mom just to be safe. Oswald said she wasn't available because she was at work and asked that she not be called.
Well, you know, this happened at school and you can't be too careful, so I called our principal, Mr. McMurdo, and asked him what I should do. And he said, well, Myra, take him down to Monteleopard. That's where we always take the kids when they turd or they get sick. Well, Monteleopard Clinic is about a mile east of the school on Canal Street. So we got in the car and I drove Harvey down and they examined him and they said he was fine. Then it was getting dark and it was a little after 5. So I didn't want him going home by himself. So I asked him where he lived. He said he lived on Exchange Alley down near the river. So I drove him down and it was really a kind of disgusting place. And I was awfully glad I didn't live.
We just heard Oswald's teacher say that she gave Oswald a ride home to Exchange Alley at some point during the spring semester of 1954, so that is certainly sometime before school was out for the year. But we have evidence that during the spring semester of 1954, Oswald lived at 1454 St. Mary's, where Marguerite's friend, Myrtle Evans, was the landlord. They lived there until they moved next door to 1452 St. Mary's in November of 1954 to get a better rent rate. This is consistent with Warren Commission Exhibit 1963, which is a timeline of Oswald's various addresses. Exchange Alley where Oswald was dropped off by his teacher, and St. Mary's are 2 miles apart. So, what exactly is happening here? Is Myra DeRouse misremembering where she dropped off Oswald, or what? In typical fashion, the Warren Commission never interviewed Myra DeRouse, but she was interviewed by the FBI, and that report says that the interview took place on April 2nd, 1964. But DeRouse claims that the FBI actually spoke to her on the Monday after the assassination, which would be November 25th of 1963, not April of 1964. One more discrepancy in the official record that was pointed out by Myra DeRouse was the room number for his homeroom class on his report card for the spring of 1954. DeRouse says that her homeroom was in the cafeteria, which was in the basement, but Oswald's report cards in the National Archives show Lee Oswald, grade 8, homeroom 303. Maybe this is just another clerical error that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But DeRouse's homeroom was in the basement cafeteria, not up on the 3rd floor of the school. So why does Oswald's report card say different? Lee Harvey Oswald completed 8th grade at Beauregard Junior High in New Orleans, and he started 9th grade at Beauregard in the fall of 1954. But there is substantial evidence that points to Oswald attending Stripling Junior High in Fort Worth at the beginning of the 9th grade in the fall of 1954, when he was supposed to be enrolled at Beauregard Junior High in New Orleans. So, what sort of evidence supports this narrative? The starting point is the Warren Commission testimony of Lee's brother Robert Oswald. Robert told the commission in 1964 that Lee went to Stripling Junior High School. Years earlier, Robert was interviewed by the Fort Worth Star-Telegram after Lee had defected to the Soviet Union in 1959, and when Lee came back to America in 1962. In both of those interviews, Robert Oswald is consistent in stating that Lee went to Stripling Junior High in Fort Worth. To be clear, Robert Oswald tells the commission that Lee went to Stripling for 7th grade for the 1951 and 1952 school year, but the evidence clearly shows that Lee lived in New York for the 7th grade and attended 2 different schools while he was there in New York and spent some time in the youth house for truancy during that school year. So he certainly was not in Fort Worth. It would be easy to say that Robert Oswald just has the years mixed up, and who really cares about that? But the problem is that Robert was steadfast in his insistence that Lee went to Stripling Junior High in Fort Worth. Also, Robert's statements to the Star-Telegram in 1962 state that Lee attended Stripling, quote, about a year before he enlisted in the Marines. So that tends to support a later timeline, closer to Oswald's freshman or sophomore year of high school. The official story claims that Lee Harvey Oswald never attended Stripling at all. In 1993, in an attempt to follow up on Robert Oswald's testimony, researcher John Armstrong got in touch with the then Stripling principal Ricardo Galendo to see if there was any truth to Robert Oswald's consistent claims about Lee attending Stripling Junior High. Principal Galendo said that it was common knowledge that Oswald had attended Stripling. Armstrong then followed up and tried to find anyone that would have attended school with Oswald when he went to Stripling. Eventually, he was introduced to Frank Cudley, who was the vice principal of Stripling Junior High in 1963. When Armstrong asked Cudley if Oswald had attended Stripling, he said yes. Armstrong asked him how he could be so sure, at which point Cudley stated he was certain because he gave Oswald's Stripling records to the FBI. Here's Cudley's talking about his interaction with the FBI.
A Saturday morning following the Kennedy assassination, I received a call at home. I lived at 4225 Curzon at that time, from Mr. Wiley, who was my principal, telling me to go to school and to go to the records file and to get Lee Harvey Oswald's records, and that someone from the FBI would be there to pick them up. That's exactly what I did. I went to school. I went to the records files, got his records out. I did open them. I did look at them kind of in a cursory way. And the only thing I can recall is that the records for Stripling were in that he didn't attend there a full year. I put it back in a brown envelope and left it on my desk and waited 10, 15 minutes or perhaps longer. And two gentlemen came in, showed me identification that they were FBI agents. I gave them the records, and the best I remember, one of them did open the envelope and kind of looked at it, and they thanked me and they left, and I locked the doors and I went home.
Cudley said that the report card in the Oswald file only had grades for the first 6 weeks of school, and he is certain about that because of where the grades were written on the report card. Oswald wasn't at the school long enough to complete an additional report card, so he knew it had to be just 6 weeks. Cudley says that the FBI agents didn't give him a receipt or leave any true copies of the documents. They took everything. Assuming that Cudley is telling the truth, the files were likely destroyed or remain classified today because they do exist within the National Archives. A lot of this story comes down to the credibility of Cudley's assertions, but Frank Cudley isn't just any school administrator. He went on to become the superintendent of schools for all of Waco, Texas, so one would think he is a credible and honest individual. And if Cudley is right, the obvious question is, how did the FBI know to go to Stripling Junior High so soon, especially in light of all the different schools that Oswald had attended? And why was it so important for the FBI to secure Oswald's middle school records the next morning after the assassination from a school that Oswald had attended for just a few weeks? Is there anything else in support of Cudley's claim about Oswald attending Stripling? Franzetta Schubert told Armstrong that when she was in the 8th grade at Stripling, she saw Oswald at the school. She didn't say that she had any classes with him, but she remembers that she was jealous that Oswald was able to walk home for lunch every day because he lived across the street from where the basketball courts were, right next to the school. She said that he only saw him during the colder part of the 1954-55 part of the school year at Stripling. Another former Stripling student, Doug Gans, also claims that Oswald went to school there. Gans said that Oswald would shoot hoops after school at the basketball courts across the street from his house. Bobby Pitts lived at 2224 Thomas Place, next door to 2220 Thomas Place, which is the house Franzetta Schubert said Oswald would walk to during lunch each day. Pitts said that Oswald would stand on the porch outside and watch when Pitts and other neighborhood kids would play touch football. To summarize all of this, we have Cudley, Schubert, Gans, and Pitts all on the record saying that Oswald attended school at W.C. Stripling Junior High, and we headed down this road in the first place because Robert Oswald said on 3 different occasions that his younger brother Lee went to W.C. Stripling Junior High. One can rule out the Warren Commission just missing this portion of Oswald's biography because there were 0 absences recorded on Oswald's report card at Beauregard Junior High for the fall of 1954. So, there it is, all neat and tidy, wrapped up with fancy paper with a big red bow on top. Oswald was attending Beauregard Junior High in New Orleans, and he could not have been at both Beauregard Junior High and W.C. Stripling Junior High at the same time. One explanation could be that Cudley, Schubert, Gans, and Pitts just wanted a brief moment in the spotlight of celebrity, and they saw an opportunity to make something up and they ran with it. However, it is difficult for this reporter to accept that, because they really had nothing to gain, and their stories all seem to match up, especially the part about Oswald having a house very close to the school, across the street from the basketball courts. We cannot state with 100% certainty whether Oswald went to Stripling Junior High, but we do know that he was back in New Orleans in early 1955. From Oswald's Beauregard report card, it appears he was attending school full-time during the spring semester of 9th grade in 1955. During that time, Lee also picked up a new job working at Dolly Shoe Store in New Orleans. In actuality, Oswald's mother got a job at Dolly Shoes first. She started working there in early February of 1955. Then she successfully lobbied her boss to hire her son Lee to work there on March 16th of 1955. Lee's job was to put the shoes back and keep the inventory organized after customers tried shoes on if they didn't end up buying them. As it turns out, Lee was not great at doing this job, and he mostly just hung out in the stockroom and did nothing, He didn't especially contribute to the value of the store, so eventually Oswald was fired by manager Mo Goodman around noon on Tuesday, April 12, 1955. When one examines the Warren Commission report, it states that Oswald worked at the Dolly Shoe Store, mostly on Saturdays, for approximately 10 weeks in 1955. The only other information in the Warren Commission volumes about Dolly shoes is Commission Exhibit 1951, which is the W-4 form for both Marguerite and Lee Harvey Oswald. What seems to be quite interesting about this document is that the address noted is 126 Exchange Street, and the date is February 5, 1955. We have previously ascertained that this 126 Exchange Street address, from where Myra DeRoos claims she dropped off Oswald in 8th grade after he had been cleared by the doctors when a piano fell on him at school in the spring of 1954, but Commission Exhibit 1963 says that the Oswalds actually moved into 126 Exchange Street around May of 1955, about a year later. And so, if the Warren report is in fact correct and Myra DeRoos is incorrect, then why is Exchange Street listed on the W-4 forms for Dolly shoes some 3 months before the Warren Commission says that Oswald is supposed to be living there? There also seems to be a question as to why Lee Harvey Oswald's W-4 form was dated the same day as his mother's, when she in fact began working there a month prior to Lee beginning his employment there. Perhaps she was confident that she would be able to secure employment for him at the Dolly Shoe Store and filled out both forms at the same time. Another question about Dolly shoes is when exactly would Oswald have time to work there when he was attending school full-time? The Warren Commission, relying on an FBI report about Mo Goodman, said that Oswald worked mostly on Saturdays and sometimes a day or two during the week, but strictly part-time. But Mo Goodman told researcher John Armstrong something completely different in a recorded 1995 interview. He said that Oswald worked, quote, during the day and sometimes on weekends, but it was strictly part-time. Mo Goodman told investigators that he fired Oswald around noon on Tuesday, April 12th. That raises the question of why would Oswald be at work at noon on a Tuesday when he was going to school full-time at Beauregard Junior High? Beauregard Junior High was 4 miles away from Dolly's Shoe Store, and Oswald got out of school at 4:30 each day, but Dolly's Shoes closed at 5:45 during the week. So Oswald would have had to travel the 4 miles, which would have been easy to do by either walking, riding a bike, or taking the bus, but by the time that he would have been able to show up, he would have had only about an hour or so to work before the store closed for the day. Oswald's Beauregard records show that he had 0 full-day absences from March 16th to April 30th of 1955, and Ed Vogel, who was probably Oswald's closest friend, said that he didn't know anything about Oswald ever working at the Dolly Shoe Store. If Oswald worked there, he didn't mention it to Vogel. I'm not clear on what is actually going on with all of this, but the W-4 forms from Marguerite and Lee that list both of them living at an address that the Warren report says they didn't live at until 3 months later is a bit odd, to put it mildly. And it is not completely clear that Lee could have worked at Dolly Shoe and also attended school full-time, all while not missing any full days at school. According to the record, it appears as if he did both. In June of 1955, a classmate of Oswald's, Fred O'Sullivan, invited him to join the Civil Air Patrol, also known as the CAP. The CAP in 1955 and is still today a nonprofit auxiliary of the United States Air Force. It provides training to 12 to 20-year-olds who are interested in a future in aviation, the military, or both. The CAP isn't all training. They actually make an impact by flying humanitarian missions in natural disasters, as well as search and rescue missions. Oswald began attending CAP meetings at Lakefront Airport in June of 1955. On July 27th, he switched to a different CAP squadron at Moorshot Airport because it was closer to his house. Lee's friend Ed Vogel joined the Moorshot squadron with Lee a few weeks later. This is where we have the first appearance of one of the most colorful characters of the JFK assassination, David Ferrie. According to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, Ferrie was the personal pilot for Mafia kingpin Carlos Marcello and brought Marcello back to the United States after he had been deported to Guatemala, reportedly illegally by then Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Ferry is a very interesting individual who was connected to anti-Castro Cubans and also many other notorious figures in the case, like Guy Bannister. New Orleans prosecutor Jim Garrison would go on to allege that David Ferry was one of the men responsible for the murder of President Kennedy. There will be a closer examination of David Ferry when we get to Oswald's time in New Orleans in the summer of 1963. But as it pertains to the summer of 1955, the question with David Ferry and Lee Oswald is whether or not they knew one another from their time together in the Civil Air Patrol. Fred O'Sullivan, who gave Oswald the initial invitation to join the CAP, said that David Ferry left the Lakefront Squadron to move to Morshad around the same time that Oswald did. Colin Hammer attended 10 to 12 meetings of the CAP where Oswald was also present. He knew Oswald and Ed Vogel, and he said that the CAP meetings were at the Eastern Airlines hangar at the Morshad Airport. They met on Friday nights and Sunday afternoons, and David Ferry was always present when Oswald was. Ed Vogel said that Oswald was in the CAP for 2 or 3, maybe 4 drills. He remembered that Oswald attended a party that David Ferry put on after he had earned his stripes. Jerry Parades was a former instructor at the Lakefront CAP who said that Oswald attended 10 to 15 meetings where Ferry was the instructor. He said of Oswald and Ferry knowing each other as, quote, "I'm not saying that they may have been together, I'm saying that it is a certainty that they were together." Thomas Lewis Clark worked for David Ferry at his gas station on Veterans Highway. Clark says that his boss, David Ferry, told him that he had been Oswald's instructor in the Civil Air Patrol. John Illiam was in the CAP at the same time as Oswald and Ed Vogel in 1955, and he says that their squadron was overseen by David Ferry. This brings the total number of people who have knowledge of Oswald being in the Civil Air Patrol with David Ferry to at least 6. The question of whether Ferry knew Oswald was decided once and for all by a photograph that PBS Frontline obtained from Oswald's fellow CAP member, John Saravallo. The photograph shows Oswald and Ferry together at the same cookout with other CAP members. This proves definitively that what these 6 witnesses said was in fact true. In the summer of 1955, Lee Harvey Oswald did in fact know David Ferry.